These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Selena Norris Gray, with 2 of her children at Arlington House. During the Civil War, she safeguarded George Washington family heirlooms. Years later, this photo surfaced on eBay and was spotted by a National Park Service volunteer. A touring showman billed as the world's tallest man stands in Liverpool in 1924. He holds another performer on his arm to show scale as the street crowd gathers. This engraving, dated 1861, depicts Sergeant Andrew Martin Chandler of the 44th Mississippi Regiment and his servant Silas Chandler. Often shared as a childhood photo of Marilyn Monroe, likely a hand-colored studio portrait from the early 1930s. The hair and dress match pre-war Hollywood style, which keeps the legend alive. Early photo of Elvis Presley in Tupelo in 1948, posing with a bicycle on the street. His cousin Billy Smith and childhood friend Sam Bell later confirmed it was him. An early 1900s ad promotes Professor Mac's Chin Reducer, a strap device claimed to massage the chin and neck for a youthful look. It was sold by mail from New York with a free booklet and big promises. Group portrait of a San Fernando Valley motorcycle club in the 1970s. This chapter later became part of the famous Angels. The patches and leather vests capture an era when small clubs joined a larger network. Detroit, 1984. Tigers fans took to the streets after a World Series win over the San Diego Padres, 4-1. The night became known for overturned cars and bright flames in the roadway. This 1970s ad for Hear Muffs pitched pillow-style headphones designed for comfy listening in bed. They were mail-ordered from Downers Grove, Illinois, for under $30. A wooden head with long arms from an old scarecrow mounted on a bearing so it could spin in the wind. The motion made it look alive and kept crows and hawks away from fields. Ota Benga, an Mbuti man, came to the United States for the 1904 World's Fair. His story reflects the era's controversial public exhibitions. A frequently circulated family photo, which allegedly depicts a young Walt Disney around 1906 with his sister Ruth on the porch. A large bow and high-buttoned boots correspond to the usual children's fashion of the 19th century. In November 1966, due to bad weather, New York was covered with thick smog for 3 days, which turned the horizon gray. Health officials later linked at least 168 deaths to the event, which led to stricter air regulations and constant pollution monitoring. A young activist hands leaflets to drivers in Tehran in 1979 as protests against the Shah spread across the city. Within months, nationwide strikes and mass marches forced the monarch to leave, and a new government took power. Early 1990s, Kurt Cobain is in tears backstage after a demanding show during Nirvana's fast rise. The constant touring and sudden fame of the grunge era show the pressure on artists in this rare, unguarded moment. 1945 on Okinawa, a United States serviceman shares his field rations with a child while another waits, as civilians slowly return from hiding after heavy fighting. Scenes like this show how troops often gave food and basic care to local families in the final months of the Pacific War. Early 1900s, a Chesbro manufacturing company wagon delivers Vaseline in New York after Robert Chesbro's 1872 patent made petroleum jelly a household item. Horse-drawn carts and big storefront signs were key street advertising before motor trucks took over. This tiny tag is a clip for a bread bag created by Floyd G. Paxton, who came up with the first version on a flight in 1952 by cutting an expired card with a small blade. Later, his company began mass production of plastic quick lock packages for sealing bread bags. Wallpaper began as a cheaper stand-in for wall tapestries, used to warm and decorate bare walls. In 1481, King Louis XI ordered painted paper hangings that his court could take down and carry from place to place. 1897 in Pittsburgh, a Heinz worker uses a hand-cranked machine to bottle the company's tomato ketchup. Heinz pushed clean factories and clear glass bottles after the 1870s, helping turn ketchup into a national pantry staple. January 1944, at McCloskey General Hospital in Texas, 3 United States soldiers from the New Georgia Campaign practice rehab drills after surgery for left leg injuries. The training built strength and balance so they could walk with early artificial limbs soon after fitting. 1917, in the Appalachian Mountains, an older woman rests on her porch with a pipe after a long day of work. Pipe smoking was common in rural Appalachia then, often using homegrown tobacco and simple corn cob or wooden pipes. Early 1900s, a street fundraiser in a rough Santa suit collects money for the Volunteers of America to send gifts and dinners to families in Chicago. Early holiday costumes were handmade and practical, which is why this Santa looks stark compared to the modern version. October 6, 1965. The Supremes pose in fur-trimmed outfits with Polaroid instant cameras hanging from their necks. The cameras used peel-apart film that produced a finished print in about 1 minute. Mid-1950s, model Betty Page poses in a striped two-piece, the look that made her bangs and playful style a pop icon. Her photos shaped fashion shoots and fan culture for decades, long after she left public life in 1959. September 1987, Senator Joe Biden, with Jill Biden beside him, ended his 1988 run after reports showed he used lines from other politicians and misstated parts of his academic record. He rebuilt his career, became vice president, and later won the presidency in 2020. October 1977, Anita Bryant was hit with a pie during a press conference in Des Moines while she was promoting her campaign to repeal a local rights ordinance. The widely broadcast clip turned into one of the decade's most replayed protest moments. 1925, high-rise riggers balance on a timber derrick above New York City, tightening lines that lift steel to the top floors. Small ironworker crews built the soaring frames without modern harnesses, shaping the skyline just before the Chrysler and Empire State era. In 1933, the Z-Roll scoop was equipped with an aluminum handle with a heat-conducting liquid that transfers heat from your hand and helps crush hard ice cream. Thanks to the solid body and the pointed edge of the spoon, neat curls are obtained. A wooden toy engine stamped "Made in Western Germany" dates it between 1949 and 1990, before reunification. Such labels act like timestamps for collectors, showing how everyday objects quietly map the Cold War. Winter 1911. The American Falls crusted with ice so thick the river looked frozen solid. That season, crowds even walked the ice bridge below the falls. A practice ended after a collapse in 1912. Winter 1910. An electric trolley pushes through a New York snowstorm as its plow car clears the rails to keep service moving. Street railways used special sweepers with rotating brooms and wedge plows, and motormen worked in open cabs through ice and wind. Around 1955, an inventor demonstrates a homemade hydraulic bedside switch that let you turn off a lamp without leaving the covers. Tubes filled with fluid pushed a remote lever on the wall switch, an early step toward modern remote controls. Behind the scenes of Jaws: The Revenge in 1987, divers film a full-size animatronic shark mounted on a hydraulic rig in a Bahamian tank. The fourth Jaws movie used mechanical sharks for close shots, letting crews stage underwater action safely and on schedule. Mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe laughs while posing as photographer. Milton Green's young son snaps a picture during a playful moment on set. Monroe and Green created many of her landmark photo sessions, and in 1955 co-founded Marilyn Monroe Productions. In the summer of 1941, 3 crosses marked the graves of German tankers on the Eastern Front next to their damaged machine. The location of the action is in the sector of the 9th Panzer Division of Army Group South. Late 1950s in Paris, rising actor Alain Delon meets famed singer Edith Piaf backstage after a show. Piaf was already a national icon, while Delon was just beginning the screen roles that soon made him a major star in European cinema. 1970, West Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Gas for Pipes agreement, trading large diameter pipes and equipment for long-term deliveries of Siberian natural gas. The first gas reached West Germany in 1973. February 10, 1966, Bob Marley marries Alpharetta Rita Anderson in Kingston, Jamaica. Soon after, he spent time working in the United States, then returned as the Wailers' sound began to reach a wider audience. A B-17 waist gunner stands at his defensive position as spent cases carpet the floor during a high-altitude mission. Crews worked in thin air and deep cold, using oxygen masks and heated suits on long flights over Europe. 1936, a farm boy sits on a wind-blown soil drift from the Dust Bowl on the Great Plains. Years of drought and deep plowing stripped topsoil, driving huge dust storms and prompting the new Soil Conservation Service to change farming methods. A hornbook was a single page fixed to a small wooden paddle and sealed under thin animal horn, used in schools from the 1500s to the 1800s. Children practiced the alphabet, numbers, and a short prayer, and the horn cover kept the page safe for years of reuse. The enamel sign of Fry's chocolate from the early 20th century depicts the famous faces of the 5 boys who moved from despair to realization, one of the most famous British advertisements. Fry's, founded in 1728, was a pioneer in creating color labels and artist-led advertising campaigns. July 4, 1889, a man poses in front of the Western Hotel in California, seated in a handcart with 2 large flags while a small drum corps looks on. Local Independence Day parades often mixed homemade floats. Early 1960s, Salvador Dalí shares a festive toast with Brigitte Bardot, smiling over a gold cup at a gala event. The artist and the screen icon often crossed paths at European parties during this era of headline-making glamour. 1970 at Tyndall Air Force Base, ground crews mount AIR-2 Genie training rounds with inert payloads under a McDonnell F-101B Voodoo interceptor. These unguided rockets were meant to disrupt large bomber formations. 1913, advertisement for a Colt automatic pistol titled Unafraid, showing a mother by a crib as a figure appears at the window. Early 20th century marketing often tied household safety and law and order to new semi-automatic pistols, reflecting changing ideas about personal protection. 1945, Soviet and United States soldiers celebrate together in Germany after the fighting in Europe ended. An accordion, shared cups, and unit badges show an informal victory gathering between recent allies. 1960, future President Jimmy Carter drives a tractor with his sons on the family peanut farm in Plains, Georgia. Those farm years shaped his image as a hands-on worker, and later helped power his outsider run for the White House in 1976. Inventor Elias Howe patented a practical lock-stitch sewing machine in 1846 after years of work in a textile shop. Courts in 1854 upheld his patent, so he earned royalties on most machines sold in the United States until it expired in 1867. Late 1960s magazine ad for the Space Ranger, a jet-powered personal platform sold as a build-it-yourself kit for $5,795. It promised vertical takeoff and hovering like a helicopter, capturing the jetpack dreams that never became everyday transport. Late 1970s, George W. Bush and Laura Bush at a Texas event early in their marriage. They wed in 1977. Before national politics, he worked in energy and baseball while she was a librarian and teacher. 1955 in the United States, an officer writes a citation as a driver in a Ford Thunderbird checks her papers at a busy intersection. Post-war traffic enforcement expanded with the car boom and new safety rules. 1935 in Bridgewater, England, a mother wades through floodwater, towing a small boat so her children can reach school. Seasonal river floods often covered the Somerset levels, so families used boats and carts to keep daily life moving. In 1944, the Japanese battleship Musashi, one of the largest ever built, went down in the Sibuyan Sea during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. An 8-year search led by Paul Allen found the wreck in 2015, and it is now treated as a protected war grave. Mid-20th century, Kids set up sidewalk lemonade stands like this one, with a hand sign noting proceeds for the Red Cross. Prices often ran 1 to 5 cents, giving children a first lesson in money, service, and sales. The locomotive froze above the abyss after the bridge suddenly collapsed beneath its weight in Canada, 1926. Witnesses described the scene as one of the most dramatic railway incidents of the decade. On December 6, 1957, the first attempt to launch a United States satellite, Vanguard TV-3, failed a few seconds after launch at Cape Canaveral, when the launch vehicle lost thrust and fell back, and the small payload was dropped and continued to transmit data. In East Berlin in 1950, the Central Committee building of the Socialist Unity Party displayed a giant portrait of Joseph Stalin, mounted for his 70th birthday on December 21, 1949. Pat Lawler was featured as Playboy's Playmate of the Month in August 1955, with her pictorial photographed by Hal Adams. She was later signed by Columbia Pictures in 1956 and appeared in the 1957 science fiction film Invasion of the Saucer Men. These Austro-Hungarian gendarmes wear heavy sheepskin gear similar to the Hungarian bunda, a practical shield against the freezing Carpathian winter of 1914 and 1915. The Royal Hungarian Gendarmerie overcoat officially used a black sheepskin collar from 1895. This 1950s aerial shows a fast-growing housing tract in Alexandria, Virginia, as farmland gave way to rows of post-war homes. Veterans' home loan benefits and Federal Housing Administration support helped families buy these houses. On April 23, 1971, Vietnam veterans against the war returned their medals at the United States Capitol by tossing them over a fence during Operation Dewey Canyon 3. Reports counted hundreds of participants in this final act of the week-long protest, documented in news coverage that day. This supposed police mugshot of ventriloquist dummy Frank Byron Jr. is actually a publicity card by the great Lester from 1924, revealed by the impossible date February 31. The gag lists the dummy's offense as laugh-getter and name-drops Detroit's Temple Theater as part of clever vaudeville marketing. In Leningrad in 1927, doctors held group hypnosis sessions to treat alcohol dependence, and hypnotherapy was the dominant method in local psychoneurological clinics in the 1920s. Soviet specialists even tested film-based hypnosis. This shows Cesar Romero as the Joker with Eartha Kitt as Catwoman on the 1966 Batman TV series, with Kitt joining in Season 3 in 1967. The first on-screen Batman adaptation was actually the 1943 Columbia serial, not the 1966 show. At Sammy's Bowery Follies in New York City, a resident cat calmly sipped a sleeping patron's beer in a photo taken in December 1947. The Bowery Dive mixed vaudeville shows, tourists and locals, from 1934 until it closed in 1970. Betty Robinson won the first women's Olympic 100-meter race in 1928. Then, in 1931, she survived a plane crash, as a result of which she fell into a coma and recovered for many years after her savior initially considered her dead. But she returned to take gold in the relay at the Berlin Games in 1936. On April 4, 1955, at 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister Winston Churchill held the door of the royal car as Queen Elizabeth II departed after a dinner he hosted. Churchill wore his Order of the Garter regalia that night and resigned the next day. Near Chu Lai, Vietnam in 1966, Marines walked to the beach in towels while still carrying rifles as they headed to bathe. Security rules near the airbase meant keeping weapons close even for a quick wash. American paratroopers forded a river near Ben Cat, South Vietnam, during a rainstorm in September of 1965. This image became one of the widespread scenes of the early war years, often titled as The Crossing of the Monsoon Season. Piet van der Zwaard of Doorn, Netherlands, posed in November 1955, claiming the title of Europe's heaviest man at about 456 pounds, photographed by Arie van Vliet. Dutch agency captions list him as 46 years old, with a 2-meter waist and the heaviest man in our country. The Toshiba View phone, demonstrated in Tokyo in 1964, sent a real-time image of a face simultaneously with a voice call using a camera and small screens at both ends. Virgil A. Gates of Charleston, West Virginia, patented a mustache shield on April 18, 1876 to keep whiskers clear while eating or drinking, held by elastic loops over the ears. The patent drawing shows a curved guard made of rubber or metal secured by cords, a quirky solution often cited among odd inventions. Built by customizer J. Erberg in 1986 and stretched 100 feet, the American Dream is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest car and was restored in the 22nd year for display in Orlando. The Cadillac-based limousine rides on 26 wheels and once boasted a swimming pool. A handcrafted tabletop cigarette dispenser. Lift the small handle to raise the drum, and a cigarette slides out through the top slots, with the side bell likely chiming as a novelty touch. Inside the clock face in London, timekeeper William Elson climbed more than 200 steps 3 times each week to compare the time with Greenwich and set the great clock. Big Ben is hand-wound 3 times a week and fine-tuned by adding or removing old pennies on the pendulum to keep it within seconds of the correct time. Republican pilots lunch beside a Polikarpov I-16 Type 10 nicknamed Mosca, the upgraded 4-gun variant that arrived in Spain in 1938. The I-16 gave the Republic early air superiority until outmatched by the Bf-109, but remained a frontline fighter through the war. Bill Stropp built this radical Mercury Mermaid in 1957 for Daytona Speed Week, starting with a Monterey convertible and removing the windshield to reduce air resistance. The car achieved over 180 miles per hour on Daytona Beach. The crews of the Japanese Naval Aviation attend a briefing on board the aircraft carrier before the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The Kido Butai Task Force, with 2 groups totaling more than 300 aircraft from 6 aircraft carriers, attacked Oahu airfields and fleet bases at dawn. It is a motoring veil from the early 1900s, a sheer hood worn over a large hat with a mica eye window to keep dust and wind off the face while driving open cars. Edwardian women routinely tied these long veils over hats and under the chin. A horse-drawn, children's delight, portable carousel wagon with a small organ or calliope, built by George B. Marks Wagon Company of Brooklyn around 1910. The round platform was hand-cranked to rotate, while the enclosed music box provided tunes for neighborhood rides. In Bagnara, Calabria, in 1945, a fish seller balanced a large swordfish on a headboard, a common sight in the Strait of Messina's swordfish villages, where the catch was carried from boats to market. William Edmund Ansley, a 4'2" actor hired by Brown Shoe Company to portray comic strip mascot Buster Brown, kept touring stores in costume for decades, and was photographed in November 1946 in Hugo, Oklahoma. June Taylor, famed choreographer for the Jackie Gleason Show, personally stretched a dancer in New York City on September 30th, 1955, to keep her limber between numbers. Her troupe's precision routines were a television signature. In Dublin, in 1888, 9-year-old Rose McGinley and 12-year-old Grace McGee were photographed after being arrested for handing out bread to a 70-year-old man who had just been evicted, a shocking snapshot of the era of the land wars. In Seattle, in 1973, Seattle City Light unveiled curbside Electropark chargers and a prototype electric AMC Gremlin that plugged into a modified parking meter for 25 cents per hour. Superintendent Gordon Vickery championed the experiment during the oil crisis. This 1952 ad promotes a compact, complete kitchen that stacked a refrigerator with a 2 to 3 burner stove and a tiny sink into a single 5-square-foot unit sold by General Air Conditioning Corp. Open-air rooftop wards like this one were common in the early 20th century, when doctors prescribed sun and fresh air to patients with polio, arthritis, and especially tuberculosis. In hospitals, verandas and roof decks were built so that beds could be taken outside for several hours, or even overnight. The late Victorian-era painting depicts the Scarborough fishing flotilla anchored, while wheeled bathing cars line the beach. According to local laws, bathing machines in 1897 served as mobile changing rooms, delivered to the water for modest sea bathing. Yes, Volkswagen owners could buy the Hertella Auto Kaffee machine, a dash-mounted coffee maker made for the 1959 Beetle that plugged into the cigarette lighter and dispensed into magnetic porcelain cups. Few survive, and it's considered one of the rarest VW accessories today. The Titanic orphans were actually French brothers, Michel and Edmond Navratilli, who were photographed in New York after being rescued and incorrectly named Louis and Lola because they only spoke French. RMS Mauritania in dry dock in Liverpool, showing off its massive rudder and combined 3- and 4-bladed propellers installed during the first tests to optimize speed and efficiency. Launched in 1906 for the Cunard Company, the Mauritania received a blue ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic. Alexander Gardner photographed the covered turnpike bridge over the Kansas River at Lawrence in 1867, with a toll sign warning, "No riding or driving faster than a walk." Built as a Howe Truss toll bridge in 1863, it was the main crossing until later floods and replacements. It's not a kitchen tool at all. It's an Andean silver dress pin called a tupu, which women use to secure shawls or capes and often wear as a badge of status, sometimes in pairs tied with a string or chain. A United Press International Combat photo from South Vietnam in 1966, popularly captioned, "The Unseen Enemy," showing a U.S. soldier firing at adversaries concealed in jungle cover. Lance Corporal Charles C. Seed of Portsmouth, Ohio, carries an elderly Vietnamese woman who couldn't keep pace with a patrol near the Arizona Territory west of Da Nang in February 1970. Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis pose on the rooftop Spook Central set during production of Ghostbusters, filmed late 1983 and released in 1984. The rooftop of 55 Central Park West was recreated on a massive Burbank soundstage with a 360-degree cyclorama for the Gozer climax. Not a cooker. It's a small perforated potpourri holder or drawer sachet tin meant to be filled with scented herbs so fragrance can vent through the holes. Similar ventilated tins were kept in trunks, wardrobes, or drawers to perfume linens and deter moths. An automobile heads west on an unpaved stretch of Sunset Boulevard between Carrollwood and Delfern Drives in Beverly Hills around 1925, with a trio of palms marking the curve. In 1971, Barack Obama meets with his father, Barack Obama Sr., during a short visit to Hawaii, the only time they spent together after early childhood. The Marseille Transborder Bridge transported gondolas with pedestrians and vehicles through the Old Port from December 1905 year until the destruction during the war in 1944. Designed by engineer Ferdinand Arnaudin, the steel span is about 86 meters high for about 240 meters. A candid carriage photograph from the Diamond Jubilee year shows Queen Victoria smiling, a rarity since court photographers usually captured solemn expressions. Many sources attribute this image to court photographer Charles Knight in 1897. After 2 kamikaze strikes off Okinawa on May 11, 1945, the carrier's hangar deck was a charred ruin of corsairs, ruptured fuel lines, and melted steel, as sailors picked through wreckage and fires for survivors. The attack killed nearly 400 and wounded over 260. Construction crews suspended from cables install aluminum reflective panels on the 305-meter Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico shortly before its official opening on November 1, 1963. Eventually, about 38,000 perforated panels were used in the fixed spherical dish. A teardrop purse atomizer for perfume made by Marcel Franck of Paris in the Art Deco era, designed to spray scent through the tiny top orifice when the side button is pressed. Frank specialized in brass, gold, or chrome-plated travel atomizers from the 1920s-30s. This is a long, two-pronged man catcher, a spear grip for grabbing an opponent at a distance, most often by the neck or shoulders, in order to pull him off a ladder or from a horse and immobilize him for capture. Similar spears are found in museums and private collections as replicas of medieval patterns. American Marines are pulling a tunnel rat out of a Viet Cong hideout in the Chi region, where a 250-kilometer underground network served as bases, supply routes, and ambush positions during the war. Specialized volunteers climbed inside with a pistol and a flashlight to defuse booby traps. The photo shows a real Navy Special Wishes cheat dated July 20, 1967. Article 1, Petty Officer David Jarvis Anderson asks for 3 days off with the wording, "My wife plans to get pregnant this weekend, and I definitely want to be there when it happens," and the report is signed for approval. This is a photograph of a Soviet receipt for the payment of an administrative fine of 50 rubles, allegedly for faith in God in 1974. In the late Soviet period, anti-religious norms were in force, and believers were often fined for violating the laws on the separation of church and state. A painter stands on the ironwork of Blackpool Tower during post-war maintenance in 1953, a hair-raising job done with minimal safety gear in that era. The 518-foot seaside landmark has required constant repainting and repairs since opening in 1894 to resist the salty wind off the Irish Sea. In the Paris suburb of Lille in 1848, the owner of the Plessis-Piquet Hotel, Joseph Guessin, turned the Guinguette restaurants into a cabaret in the treetops, placing dishes in houses on a giant chestnut tree and naming his establishment Le Grand Robinson in honor of the Swiss Robinson family and Robinson Crusoe. Crowds of people crowd into the hangar of a giant Zeppelin airship from the interwar era of passenger Zeppelins, when liners like the Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg transported travelers across the Atlantic with walking alleys, dining halls, and even a sealed smoking lounge. Boarding was often carried out from huge hangars. Felice Bonetto four-wheel drifts a Cisitalia single-seater through Mantova's city course in 1948, cigarette in mouth and arms crossed over the wheel in classic pre-war style. Before his Formula One podiums with Alfa Romeo and Maserati, Fordson, converted to a pole road locomotive, worked for Scott Brothers on semi-rail, striped roads made of logs in the early 1920s. Such tractors, known as Mack Fordson, hauled timber along planks made of poles, where laying a full-fledged logging railway was too expensive. At London's hairdressing and beauty fair at Olympia in September 1936, stylists demonstrated the McDonald's Steam Permanent Waving Apparatus, a chandelier-style perm machine that heated chemically treated hair with multiple tubular heaters. Public health crusader Dr. Charles A. R. Campbell promoted giant municipal bat roosts in San Antonio to lure colonies of free-tailed bats as a natural check on malaria mosquitoes. The city erected its first official tower in the mid-1910s with warning plaques urging residents to protect bats. Logging camp overshoes, or cork boot sandals, let workers step into the mess hall without shredding floors with the steel caulks on their spike-soled boots. Camps and riverboats often required them by rule in the early 20th century. These strap-on wood and leather platforms fit over caulk boots during breaks. On May 1, 1926, President Calvin Coolidge greeted Boy Scouts on the South Lawn during the National Council's meeting in Washington, a scene captured with hats aloft around the president. It's not a kitchen item. It is a handmade leather tool for embossing and pressing lines along the edge, allowing you to make decorative prints like the letter A and soften the bend before cutting. Magazine ads in the 1960s really did sell live squirrel monkeys for $18.95, shipped by the Miami Beach firm Animal Farm, which promised a free cage, leash, toy, instructions, and live delivery guaranteed. Thousands were imported from South America during the late 1960s early 1970s. On November 4, 1909, British aviator John Moore Brabazon made a short hop at Lansdowne with a piglet in a basket labeled, "I am the first pig to fly," cheekily proving the proverb wrong. Workers make and pack waffle cones at the sanitary ice cream cone Kober factory in Oklahoma City, April 3, 1917. Footage from the collection of the National Committee on Child Labor captures teenagers on packaging and hot presses baking cones. The H0 scale set of the Pico Railway from the GDR is a cult dream of Soviet children, which has been imported en masse from socialist Germany since the late 1950s. The Pico brand originated in 1949 and produced starter kits with a locomotive, wagons, rails, and a transformer. A queue of workers for pay at a warehouse building. Payday on the Levee, New Orleans, circa 1906. A picture from the Detroit Publishing Collection shows a long line at the cash dispenser on the waterfront. The future movie star actually worked as a high-rise installer on the Sydney Harbor Bridge. This shot is usually attributed to 1971, when Hogan was still painting and rigging the arches of the bridge, several years before appearing on television. The photo shows young actress Alicia Witt with her brother Ian and their mother Diana Witt, who appeared in the Guinness Book of Records as the owner of the longest hair, about 2.59 meters. She held the status from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s. Pictured is model Marie Delroy demonstrating an experimental General Electric television transmitter at the 5th Annual Radio World's Fair, New York, September 22, 1928. The radio exhibitions of the late 1920s served as a showcase for early mechanical television. This is a 1920s electric handheld massager, a plug-in home device with a metal motor body sold for soothing muscles and beauty care. Models included rubber attachments for different uses and plugged into household outlets for easy home use. The underground machine shop on the territory of the base in the Javar Cave, located near the border, was part of a network of tunnels laid at a depth of up to 500 meters deep into the mountain, with power supply, storage facilities, and repair shops operating in 1985. Boiler House at City Deep Gold Mine in Johannesburg, documented in 1966, with attendants managing furnaces that supplied the site with steam. That steam powered hoists, pumps, and ventilation that sustained deep-level operations across this major Witwatersrand mine. Trieste, in 1979, was the center of mental health reform in Italy, as Law No. 180 of 1978 ordered the closure of psychiatric hospitals and encouraged community service inspired by the works of Franco Basaglia. A ship medicine chest from the White Star Line liner Majestic in 1914 reflects the requirement to carry onboard medical supplies, which then included poppy-based pain medicines. For decades, Louisiana State University's live mascot Mike rode into Tiger Stadium in a mobile enclosure, often with cheerleaders on top, as a pre-game ritual. After 2015, the university ended on field appearances. In June 1970, a young Prince of Wales water-skied while sitting on a chair at Sunninghill Park in Windsor after a playful challenge from Lord Snowdon. The light-hearted images became widely shared and are preserved in major photo archives today. Monetization Green. In Hexham, England in 1957, sisters Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock were lost in a road accident, and in 1958, their parents had twins Gillian and Jennifer, who soon recognized their sisters, toys, and former school. In the spring of 1984, the IG Metal Trade Union rallied workers against the backdrop of a wave of automation of production using computers and robots, and, after the March strikes with warnings, announced a 7-week strike to achieve a 35-hour workweek. A 3-axle double-decker trolleybus built by AEC with an English electric body was shipped by sea to the Soviet Union in 1937 as a model for Moscow and later served as the basis for Ye-TB3. Delivered first to Leningrad, the tall car had to be towed along the roads to Kalinin and then transported by barge to Moscow. In 1904, a Red Cross ambulance train was prepared in St. Petersburg under the patronage of Empress Maria Feodorovna, to provide medical assistance to victims of the Russian-Japanese conflict on railway transport. About 78 hospital trains were dispatched in Russia. Japan has used decommissioned buses and boats as artificial reefs after removing dangerous parts to create shelters for fish, and Japanese researchers have documented examples, including plans in Kagoshima Bay. In 1941, Orson Welles sold Charlie Chaplin the concept of Landru's Bluebeard film, which Chaplin embodied in the 47th dark comedy Monsieur Verdoux called The Orson Welles Story. Despite the strong reception, the film was nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. Hungarian troops entered Svanta Gheorghe on September 13, 1942 years after the presentation of the Second Vienna Prize, and crowds of people in the streets greeted columns with flags and flowers. In accordance with the arbitration decision of Germany and Italy, northern Transylvania was transferred to Hungary from Romania. A rotating tide calculator used by sailors set the date and moon on the outer ring, then read the inner rings to see current direction and strength. The place names are faroes, channels, and fjords, so it helped boats time safe passage through fast straits. May 1945 in Berlin, residents crowd rail sidings as the Soviet military administration hands out free potatoes after the fighting ended. With farms and supply lines damaged, these early relief deliveries kept many families fed until regular rationing returned. The 1952 Mr. Universe winner lived to 104 and was nicknamed Pocket Hercules for a 4 feet 11 inches frame. He kept training in the gym even at 104 and passed away in 2016. 1923, a group of American volunteers poses at the Kuzbas Autonomous Industrial Colony in Siberia, set up to boost coal and chemical production. Their work helped jumpstart the Kuznetsk Basin's industry before the experiment was folded into regular Soviet management later in the decade. In 1923, American and European volunteers worked at the Kuzbas Autonomous Industrial Colony in Kemerovo, rebuilding coal mines and launching a coking plant and chemical works. The experiment lifted the Kuznetsk Basin and was absorbed into regular Soviet management by 1926. July 31, 1976, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis briefly takes the wheel aboard the Staten Island Ferry during a summer trip across New York Harbor. That decade, she was a leading preservation voice in the city, helping protect landmarks like Grand Central Terminal. August 1941. Near Gatchina, Lieutenant Zinovy Kolobanov's KV-1 ambush stopped an armored column. His crew is credited with 22 tanks and his company with 43 in one action. The pitted turret shows how the heavy armor held after dozens of hits. Near the top of the Eiffel Tower, Gustave Eiffel kept a small private apartment for quiet meetings and science experiments. In 1889, he welcomed guests like Thomas Edison there, and a restored display now lets visitors see the room. Late 19th to early 20th century, skirt lifters, or dress clips. The spring clamp hooked to a belt or chatelaine, and the spoon ends gripped the skirt hem. They kept long dresses out of mud and puddles, and could also hold up fabric for walking or cycling. 1920s, a man operates a small home still to distill homemade liquor into glass bottles. Informal distilling was common in the countryside during tax hikes and dry campaigns, using simple boilers, coils, and kerosene heat. April 13, 1902, engineer Pyotr Fries tested Russia's first trolleybus in St. Petersburg, drawing power from overhead wires via a trailing pole. Newspapers called it an electric automobile, an early step toward modern electric transit. 1903, London. A mother cradles her baby on a cold stoop in a crowded working-class court. Photos like this helped push early reforms for housing, childcare, and public health across the city. Top, August 12, 1914. A battalion of Scottish Rifles lines up at Edinburgh Castle, about 1,000 soldiers and 27 officers before leaving for the front. Bottom, by Christmas that year, only 27 soldiers and 1 officer returned unhurt. a stark picture of early war losses. 1931, crews lay an underwater cable across the Moskva River from a floating work raft as divers guide the line to the riverbed. Projects like this powered the city's fast electrification in the first 5-year plan, linking new stations to central districts. 1912 in Caribou, Colorado. Workers pose outside the up-to-date mining company's log office, a banner boasting $20 million in ore since the silver boom. Within a few years, most shafts shut and the mountaintop town emptied, leaving Caribou a quiet remnant above Nederland. Mid-20th century, a studio backlot street turns into a comic jam as performers blast trumpet, trombone, and sax for a slapstick musical sketch. Variety shorts often mixed live music with sight gags, keeping audiences laughing between feature reels in theaters. Not a 1943 jam with the comedy duo. This is a behind-the-scenes moment from 1976 on the New York set of Marathon Man, with the younger lead pulling faces behind his veteran co-star. 1920s, a family enjoys a roadside picnic beside an early camping trailer with a fold-out kitchen and shelves in the door. Auto camping boomed in this decade as cars like the Model T let families roam and turn fields into weekend camps. November 1957, Laika became the first living creature to orbit Earth aboard Sputnik 2. A technician here carries a training rig and suit used in cabin tests. The mission gave key data on launch stress, weightlessness, and life support that guided early human flights, leading to Yuri Gagarin in 1961. 1958, 16-year-old Leslie Arnold guides Nebraska officers to a hidden burial behind the family home after weeks of keeping up normal routines at school. He later escaped custody in 1967 and lived under a new name for decades until a 2022 DNA match confirmed his identity. 1943, experimental eye shields for desert warfare use dark celluloid lenses and side flaps to block harsh sun and blowing sand. Lightweight versions like these were issued to crews and troops in North Africa to cut glare and protect eyes during dust storms. In 1938, about 1,800 Civil War veterans met at Gettysburg for the 75th anniversary, the final big blue and gray reunion. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt dedicated the Eternal Light Peace Memorial, and the youngest attendee was 88, while one man claimed 112. A palm-sized souvenir bed, warmer from Windsor Castle, modeled after the larger pans once filled with hot coals and slid between sheets to warm a bed. This tiny hinged version was for display or trinkets, echoing a 19th century comfort in miniature. 1959, a KLM flight attendant tests a survival rifle from the new Arctic Emergency Kit, issued when airlines began flying polar routes. Crews carried extreme cold clothing, flares, and a lightweight rifle in case an emergency landing left them near polar bears on the ice. 1990s era portrait of Annie Oakley, the touring star of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, who could split a playing card on edge at 30 paces and hit tossed dimes with ease. She once shot backward using a mirror, beat marksman Frank Butler at 15, and later taught safe shooting to thousands. 1969, Lou Alcindor stands at his UCLA graduation after leading the Bruins to 3 straight national titles. Soon he joined the Milwaukee Bucks, and in 1971 adopted the name Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. January 1, 1914, pilot Tony Jannus flew the Benuist 14 on the St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line, the world's first scheduled passenger airline. The first seat was auctioned to former Mayor Abram Feel. Regular fares were $5, and the 23-minute hop beat a 2-hour boat trip and a full day by rail. May 31, 1970, a powerful Peru quake triggered an ice and rock avalanche from Mount Huascaran that buried Yungay within seconds. Only Cemetery Hill with the Christ statue and 4 palms stood above the debris, saving a few thousand people, while many across Ancash lost their lives. October 30, 1938, Orson Welles fields questions after his Mercury Theater radio play, The War of the Worlds, used fake news bulletins that sounded uncannily real. The Halloween Eve broadcast sparked headline reports of public fright and later debates about how many listeners were actually fooled. A rotating needle case from the late 19th or early 20th century. The inner drum lines up with the pinhole, so you can shake out a chosen needle size marked 5 through 9. Often silver or brass and worn on a chatelaine, it kept sharp points organized and safe. 1940s. A recovering serviceman shares a playful dance with the nurse who helped him heal outside a wartime hospital. Frontline nursing plus new penicillin and blood plasma cut infection deaths sharply, sending many wounded home who once would not have survived. 1961. A young Baltimore-born political insider meets the new United States president at a Washington event. Decades later, she would become Speaker of the House. Her path was shaped early by a household steeped in public service. Her father had served both in Congress and as mayor of Baltimore. After 1945, hundreds of warships were tied up in mothball fleets like this, packed bow to stern and waiting for sale or a second life. Dehumidifiers and protective coatings kept them ready, and many sailed again in the Korean War, while others were scrapped over the next decades. February 1, 1968, Elvis and Priscilla Presley show newborn Lisa Marie to cheering fans outside the hospital in Memphis. She became the couple's only child and later a singer who preserved her father's legacy at Graceland. June 1963, James Meredith received his political science degree, becoming the first black graduate of the University of Mississippi. Just 9 months earlier, federal marshals escorted him onto campus to enroll, a moment that forced the school to open its doors to all qualified students. A mid-century telephone stand. The tray held the rotary phone, the side box stored the thick directory, and the curved handle let you drag the whole unit to a chair. It is an early take on mobile calling at home before long cords and cordless phones. In 1989, at Golden Gate Fields in California, a racing buffalo debuted as a track promotion, thundering down the dirt beside a horse. American bison can sprint about 35 miles per hour and turn quickly, so the run was short and wildly different from a normal race.